Good evening, everybody. Right on time, as always. Welcome to the new fundamental. We're back after a pretty extended hiatus. Thank you to everybody who's in here now. How am I sounding? How's the mic? In the
Me
process
too. I need some.
and
Yeah.
introducing, standing on no formality, putting his feet all on the couch. It's like he's comfortable here or something.
That's
Henry
my way.
how are you doing tonight?
I'm great. I'm very good. I'm excited to do this. As we were talking about before we went on, it's been a while, so I'm very pumped for this.
Yeah, I mean, old heads know. Me and Ward struggled with this format like the first time we ever decided to do streaming. It was me and him in the trenches of trenches.
Oh yeah.
Back when like I didn't know how microphones worked and was trying to figure out how to stream two things at once. And the first one was delayed like 7 hours. It was brutal. But yeah, I'm really excited to get to talk basketball publicly with you for the first time in 8 months.
Likewise.
So yeah, let's hop on over and get to the reason this evening. Give me one quick second. I have to remember how to do this. I have not opened this app since the last time that let's see. There we go. That was not what I meant to do. Let's see. Weird things are happening. What else is now? Okay.
Oh, it seems like we're.
Yep. Okay, cool.
There we go.
Yeah. We are fine. Things are fine. All right. How is my centering? Is this the right thing? Ooh, let's find out. Swear I did this. Okay. Yeah, here we go. That's the framing I wanted. That's the nice one. Okay. So after a little bit of like a record low amount of trouble, we can get started. So the purpose tonight is to talk about a piece that I wrote over like the better part of the last year. And it's about movement shooting. And I'm really glad to have you make sure that I've unmuted. The first problem that I ran into is that like the way that I conceived of shooting is that there's just three distinct categories: catch and shoot, movement, and off the dribble. What I pretty quickly found out is like that's not really how things are classified. And if you take these three categories, this would be like a player's 3-point distribution, and you can get to like different types of players in theory. So like if it's really heavy on catch and shoot, you know, shooter. If it's a little bit heavier on off the dribble, that's a primary creator. If it's got a little bit of movement, but a little bit of off the dribble, but you still keep the catch and shoots, like you get a general secondary creator. This was my rough approximation, and I was like, cool. Once I have this information, I can kind of start to build proxies. And little did I know, the good people at SIS had done basically this exact thing. This is up to the All-Star break, I believe. You want to walk me through this one? By the way, did not know this existed. I don't check Twitter when I'm working, and so I sent you the outline, and you're like, "Oh, I made that graph." I was like, "Oh, sick."
Yeah, it was. I was looking through it, and I thought I had seen the outline. I saw that last slide where it was the breakdown of basically not only the like three-pronged approach, but how they classify into player types. And I was like, oh, that's actually interesting because I had the same exact thought going through. I mean, that granted, it was a different lens. I wanted to sort of like pick out what the like aspects of the 3-point shooting competition were that happened 2 days ago. And so we thought it'd be fun to like take out. I mean, this is not on me. This is with help of many coworkers. Basically created a graph of like how each contestant breaks down their diet of shots. And it is almost a perfect reflection. Granted, there's only like really one primary creator in there, which is Trey. It's exactly what you had in all, you know, in your rough sketch that you created without knowing that this existed. But it's fun to see, right? Like you get Trey with, I can't read exactly the number, but 86%, I think that says, of all pull-ups, which makes sense. You take a little bit of look of someone like Luke Kennard, up to like 48%, I believe that says, off the catch. But then you get guys like Patty Mills and Bain.
And we will get into that. So like basically this was my initial conception of shooting, and what I wanted to do is just get that middle percentage in this graph. It's yellow, and say like, okay, so how does that work? How do players get from not shooting movement threes to shooting movement threes? Is there like important thresholds for movement shooting? And just to try to get a historical precedent for movement, because like really what we're trying to say is like to zoom out is what we're trying to do is find gravity, and using movement shooting as a way of better finding gravity. So you take that 3-point distribution model, you obviously need some makes, and you get gravity. That's the rough approximation. And that sentence rang in my head for like 6 weeks. And like this might be like a little too postmodernist for some people to be like, yeah, like gravity is a fictitious concept, whatever. But like the phrase "has gravity" really bothers me. And it bothers me for the reason of like, okay, so if a player has gravity, what is being possessed? And like, again, this is going to seem really dull and stupid to a lot of people. Like it most likely is. But when I say has gravity, what we're talking about is the ability to garner defensive rotations. So like, if you're garnering defensive rotations, like that can't really be something you have, because it's not something that it doesn't exist for you. I mean, I use the example that like Zion's sense of dress doesn't have my disdain. Like I disdain it. He dresses terribly. It is unfathomable to me that like a person can dress like that. But like he doesn't possess that. Like it exists because I can see it and I'm mad. It doesn't, my disdain doesn't exist in a vacuum. And like that's the problem with gravity, is that like you need defense to have gravity. Steph Curry doesn't walk into an empty gym like the gravity is there. Like his gravity exists in relation to other people. It exists, in relation to the defensive scheme. It exists in relation to the game plan at hand. And like the word "has" doesn't, like the grammatical construction isn't the problem. It's the grammatical construction reveals what the problem is. So like in the piece, I ask like, is gravity a possession? In the same way the player can have a bag. Does a player have gravity in an empty gym? What is zero gravity? Can gravity be lost or stolen? And with perfect play calling, is it possible for gravity to be part of it? These are essential questions for like our long-term mission on how movement shooting affects gravity. But like, if we don't define our terms, we're going to get nowhere. And when we look at our first clip, we can see we can see a possession where like 9 different people have gravity, and some of them are not particularly awesome shooters, are not the same level of shooters. I'm going to replay it a couple of times. I'm still trying out this feature, so let me know if there's any problems in the chat. I'm going to check it when I pass this off to Ward. But we can see at first we have like a cascading. We start with pick and roll. It gets snaked. We have a little bit of shake on the weak side. I think a zone happening here. The Hornets are. This isn't a particularly solid defensive possession. And once advantage is gained, like everybody suddenly has gravity. So everybody's getting closed out, like like it is game point in an Elam ending game. Like these are insane closeouts. And like, yeah, sure, you can talk to me for like some of these closeouts, but you can't say every single one of these is a deservingly hard closeout, and it leads to a layup. And I think that everybody here knows that those closeouts wouldn't exist the same way if there was an advantage created in the first place. So we can see that gravity, 1, doesn't exist in the vacuum, and 2, exists in relation to the possession at hand. Does this scan so far for you, Ward? Am I totally off the deep end?
No, I think it does scan. I think the difference in how you are describing gravity, like the very small ideal, or I don't even know what you call it. The difference in if you have like a list of all the criteria of what gravity is.
Occasionally, that's I like get a small notification, I guess. But working through it, I can try to turn my router on and off. But I will try to not use as much internet or whatever doesn't make the stream drop. Anyway, I will just stitch this together for YouTube. So when we put this together, I'll blend everything together into one video. So you were saying about conceptions of gravity.
Yes. So basically, I'm gonna try and galaxy brain this and see if I can actually pull it up on my phone and have a little dual thing going here. But essentially, so when you say gravity, like in that Hawks possession, you get a Kevin Herter closeout, which is like, granted, it's Terry Rozier kind of not, you know, abiding to responsibility, but not really embracing the responsibility in terms of I have to close this out here. But it's like top foot, super high top foot, um, not a great hand. Like hips have to be open by this obvious ankle Herter's going to take by how basically perpendicular he closes out. Um, so like the badness of the closeout could be mitigated by a better defender. Is distinction one, and two, on the Solomon Hill one, it's the same.
Occasionally, that's I like get a small notification, I guess, but working through it, I can try to turn my router on and off, but I will try to not use as much internet or whatever doesn't make the stream drop. Anyway, I will just stitch this together for YouTube. So when we put this together, I'll blend everything together into one video. So you were saying about conceptions of gravity.
Yes. So basically, I'm gonna try and galaxy brain this and see if I can actually pull it up on my phone and have a little dual thing going here. But essentially, so when you say gravity, like in that Hawks possession, you get a Kevin Herter closeout, which is like, granted, it's Terry Rozier kind of not, you know, abiding to responsibility, but not really embracing the responsibility in terms of I have to close this out here. But it's like top foot, super high top foot, not a great hand. Like hips have to be open by this obvious ankle Herter's going to take by how basically perpendicular he closes out. So like the badness of the closeout could be mitigated by a better defender. Is distinction one, and two, on the Solomon Hill one, it's the same.
Occasionally, that's I like get a small notification, I guess, but working through it, I can try to turn my router on and off, but I will try to not use as much internet or whatever doesn't make the stream drop. Anyway, I will just stitch this together for YouTube. So when we put this together, I'll blend everything together into one video. So you were saying about conceptions of gravity.
Yes. So basically, I'm gonna try and galaxy brain this and see if I can actually pull it up on my phone and have a little dual thing going here. But essentially, so when you say gravity, like in that Hawks possession, you get a Kevin Herter closeout, which is like, granted, it's Terry Rozier kind of not, you know, abiding to responsibility, but not really embracing the responsibility in terms of I have to close this out here. But it's like top foot, super high top foot, not a great hand. Like hips have to be open by this obvious ankle Herter's going to take by how basically perpendicular he closes out. So like the badness of the closeout could be mitigated by a better defender. Is distinction one, and two, on the Solomon Hill one, it's the same. More so to say that represents
it's
badness by the defense.
I'm in the wrong room. So Ward, it's dropping for me. I'm
okay.
It's dropping frames. I can change the settings to make it not do that. Server. Yeah, give me one moment. Yeah, it just restarts the recordings. Give me 1 second. You want to keep talking about this closeout while I change rooms to try to find someplace where the video or the Wi-Fi is a little bit better.
Gladly. But yeah, I mean, that's essentially it. So basically, to continue that point, I think that the idea would be that for gravity, for many people in their definition, it's more of a presence of mind prior to a reaction, as opposed to a situation that occurs that garners a reaction, if that makes sense. Like when you say that's already happened, as opposed to planning for something that's about to happen, which is what leads to like those horrendous closeouts where I think that also, I mean, I don't want to also spoil this, but I think we will get into more about how gravity, as we already did talk about some. It is a societal, and is a funny way of putting it, but it is purely a response, as opposed to whether it's a response prior to something happening or it's a response to something literally happening, as we just talked about. I do think it's a response, and so that's where you get those rubs of, you get a possession like that where it looks like the Hawks might as well have 3 shooters who are shooting over 50% on open catch and shoot looks, and then it makes sense to maybe close out that hard. But I'm not sure that that's the case, and so you get a mix of, or you get the image of gravity, but it's a mix of 2 paints, one being some level of offensive skill, and in that situation, most of it being a result of just, I mean, it's unfair to say if it's coached or not, but just lackluster defensive response.
Moved to right next to the record, so give me one minute while I figure this out. If I could do the itchy and scratchy cutaway, I would. Unfortunately, I can't because I don't have the technical abilities to run a stream properly. Now, all of a sudden, you guys want nice cutaways out of me. Okay, so it seems like this is a bit more stable in terms of the Wi-Fi. And I know what the sound is, and I've tried to make a couple of small adjustments. Thank you to everybody for dealing with our regularly scheduled bullshit. We don't plan it, but it does seem to find us everywhere we go. And again, we have quite a few people here, and we will fly through this as soon as I can reattach my mic. Ward, do you want to actually do a quick plug for the podcast series that you have coming?
Gladly. Yeah. So, as PD said, it's been a while since we've talked in a public space about basketball, and this is different for me because PD is a friend, and this is much more fun in terms of the how this came about. But that's not to say the podcast is not fun, because I'm very excited for that, and we've already recorded episode 1, which was a blast. But coming Wednesday morning through SIS, I'm launching an NBA podcast. It's called Playing in Space, SIS Basketball NBA Podcast. You'll be able to find it wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to go to my Twitter at Henry W. Ward, you will find links to the show page on Apple and Spotify where you can subscribe already in anticipation of that episode. It's going to be really fun. I think it's tough to sort of explain these without sounding like every other podcast. Because I think we're all, the group think's getting better, and so everyone's getting a little bit better at I do think that what will separate us and make us, I think, a fun listen is we will be sharing some stuff, some internal data that kind of drives a lot of the opinions we come to. And it'll be less focused on sort of the overarching like themes and trends of the NBA, and more focused on sort of the micro week to week stuff that we're seeing. Because we watch a lot of basketball, a lot of NBA basketball for our jobs, which is great. And that's why life is great. But I also think it makes us well suited to talk about it. So that's coming out Wednesday. And like I said, go to my Twitter and find the links to subscribe. But we're very excited.
Thank you to Ward for that very positive, very, very high level scene chewing that I needed to stall. One of the things,
always happy to.
Yeah, you cut a great plug. You missed a career in wrestling by just like 5 years. One of the things that I'll say that I struggle with is that not everybody uses the same name on Twitch as they do on Twitter, and so I can't tell always if people are being too comfortable, and I'm like, I don't know you like that, or it's just a friend who doesn't have a consistent name. And that is one of my challenges. It's just like deciding whether this is Noah or another person named Noah, which obviously would color my response. Okay, like obviously, thank you to Evan for using his normal name. That's very nice. I can parse that. Okay, so now we can get back to regularly scheduled programming. I believe I have the frame issue solved. Yeah, it seems like we've been fine for about 5 minutes. Gonna plug this on Twitter and get back to it. Okay, so we've got our first clip. Things did not go terribly. So one of the things that we see in this particular in the Hawks example is that like the leverage of the possession changes as the ball moves, and that leverage to me is the essential part, and I think there's not a greater example of this idea than Ryan Anderson. And like this is in no way slander on Ryan Anderson, who it was like an otherworldly player, especially in Orlando when like the motion 4-out shooters around Dwight like was really cracking, and like if you go back and watch those games, you're gonna be pretty surprised by how modern the stuff they run is. But like he had injuries and he was placed in a system where he was expected to just stand still and shoot from deep space. He was always more of a movement shooter, and in this 2018 playoff run, we can see that like he's either barely playing or not particularly effective. And yeah, these are just the playoff splits from a handful of games, but for a player that was so effective a year prior, 2 years prior in the space system, like what particularly changed for somebody to be minus 12 in the game that like to me was the ultimate spook of the Warriors. And most importantly, why was Eric Gordon able to be successful in this exact same scheme? This is not mine. This is just so I just, while prepping for this, searched Ryan Anderson space, and this was the first picture, and it just happened to work. So like we can see he's spaced out to the coaching box, and like that was where he kind of stood. He would shake up to like the slot, but generally in about an 8-foot direction. And at first, this is a fairly revolutionary concept to have somebody shoot threes from like Kalamazoo. But we know the endpoint is a dwindling return. And now, why is somebody like Eric Gordon able to be successful? Obviously, different players, different points in their careers, but like they share quite a few similarities in their shooting profile. And the things that I come back to is that Eric Gordon had more versatility once he got the ball. Like he was in those same spots, but he was more comfortable in multiple styles of shooting, and defenders had to respect the closeout creation from him. So a defender couldn't sell out entirely, where like they could just sprint as hard as possible right now. And he had like a sidestep, he had a step back, and like could get those off, but his passing was also dependent on getting those rotations. And if those rotations, if they were trying to bait him into like we stay home and we fly out, so like you either try to go challenge the rim or you take a heavily contested sidestep three, that's going to limit his ability on the offensive end. Where Eric Gordon, on the other hand, like had more outcomes. Those closeouts were much more pressurized. And even though he's a mediocre passer, that first step, like to me, Ryan Anderson's a better passer than Eric Gordon at sort of any point. But because Eric Gordon was able to create the windows, the passing was more meaningful. And that was the result of the pressurization of the closeouts. Is this scan so far for you? Am I having a historical retelling of the 2008 Houston Rockets or 2018 Houston Rockets?
I mean, yeah, that's like you already touched on the biggest thing, I think, which is that this is like a huge thing, scouting, that I kind of worked through, but shooting, like I think in a graph with two lines, or one is shooting skill and one is creation out of a closeout. Once and I guess there's a third line of value of the shooting skill. Once the closeout, creation out of closeouts begins to fall off, like the value of the shooting craters, and it's not like parallel. It starts to hit it hard. I think that kind of goes not under discussed, but just like when we're talking about movement shooters as a whole, the scale of which that is important might still run under the radar a little bit.
Yeah. So when we talk about pressurization, this is an example. So this is from I think last year. We get a little bit of a shake, but there's just no. This is at the moment of freezing. I think it's Franz is sprinting for his life to go close out. There is basically no other option but to shoot this ball. Absolutely, like there's the defense is basically flat. That you have a semicircle around the rim already set up. The passes are fairly limited, and there's only one real driving angle. So Franz can just like sprint for his life to get a real contest, and he does get a piece of it. But the point is that he was able to pin his ears back and jump for it because it was particularly safe in that environment because of how the offense was spaced. And this is much more about who the shooter is and how the offense is deployed, and that like different types of shooters, this wouldn't have been a safe contest. And why some shooters some even equal shooters can get different contests and different situations, to me is the failure of the idea of has gravity.
So what do you mean when you say safe contest? So I mean, I thought when the first thing you were saying is on this clip, the first thing that popped out to me as frustrating was the lack of relocation out of the Ohio State guys around the rim. Like that to me is the rub, less so than, or I mean, initially to me, that was the rub as opposed to anything with the shooter. So I want to hear what you were going to say, or more about what you want to say with sort of the shooter's responsibility here as to not make it a safe closeout.
Oh, I just like similar to Rhino being a movement shooter being put in a static environment. Like this is a shot that somebody who's like pure movement, who has no hesitation at all. Like lightning quick release is, so like this is not really a huge win situation, but it's one that a certain type of shooter excels in. And,
gotcha.
And if you're a little bit slower shooter, you need relocation from the guys on the bottom. So it's not like, oh, this is the shooter's fault. It's a marriage between expectations of system, expectations of spacing, expectations of defense, and style of shooter.
Totally.
So because of those three things not being entirely aligned, Franz gets to go like hold the turbo button and be like, I'm gambling 100% on getting this.
Right.
And when I say a safe closeout, it's just like having to defend multiple things. Like if there's a pump fake, if there's anything else, Franz is just dead. Like it is a wrap for him, and he's betting entirely on that. And that's very similar to me to how Ryan Anderson was defended. People are like, yeah, I can live with anything else based on how the spacing is aligned, based on the allocation of your abilities, based on your current ability to move. Like if we run you off the line or even force you into side steps, that's a win. And like to me, the ability to think that out, to game that out, is a failure of gravity. Because to me, when we're talking about gravity, it's based in panic. So like, as I say in the piece, like what we just saw and the Ryan Anderson closeouts are physically demanding, like to fly all the way out to 30 feet for a power forward, but it's not a difficult decision-making process. Shooters can be made one-dimensional by closeouts in a way that functions similarly to going under on pick and rolls, because if there is no texture to the decision to close out, then it's easier to close out because you don't have to think about how you will have to respond. You are simply saying, this is what's going to happen. I just have to put my hand up as hard as I can. Think about so many of the three-point shot blocks you've seen. It's often a great toolsy defender who has all of their input stabilized on their thinking so they can close out as hard as possible without worry. So because of the three dudes under the rim and some really tough three-point spacing for Ohio State in terms of like where they were relative to the shooter, Franz was safe to go as hard as he could. And that is as much a reflective of spacing, as much a reflective of the other players on the floor, but it's also reflective of the style of shooter. And when we talk about gravity, this idea has to be addressed. The idea of texturing of decision-making for defenders. So to just like summarize the two ideas, and like I don't really have a name for this, like defensive center gravity is not something I'm going to like say. It's just for the purposes of this piece. I'm just saying that like when I say gravity, I mean the second concept, not the first concept. So the first one, the benefits of like the idea of has gravity or how gravity has been seen previously is that like you can see it. Hey, this person gets tagged off on. Hey, this person's getting run off the line. Like it totally makes sense. It's offensive centric. Like Steph gets hard closeouts. That's about Steph. It's not about the defense. It's like Steph is a good shooter. Therefore, Steph is the primary mover there. And the third thing is it's a closed loop system. There's no way to get gravity. Like it's not a discussed element. It's like, oh, shoot better. Like what if you can't shoot better? Attack closeout. Well, I can't attack closeout. Well, then you should shoot better. Like it's just not. That is not a developmental model. That's an observation. Like it doesn't tell you how to fix things. Where defensive centric gravity, to me, is simply to take it to boil it down to its furthest possible point. Is to say that like gravity is extra pressurized defensive decision making and having that at volume. So does it cause panic? Does it cause large amounts of communication necessary? to me, that's a better way of thinking about gravity, because then you can, if you have a dude who just can't shoot, negative touch, no, his range is 12 feet, you can find a way to get gravity. You're just gonna have to be very creative and probably think about the system you run, the location of the players on each catch, what their particular skills are in terms of passing, in terms of attacking. Like, there are ways of generating gravity. That's just not the way that we've sort of conceived of gravity, because that's sort of seen as a different thing, or like, oh, if it's not shooting, it doesn't matter. But like, all of these are interrelated concepts, and by thinking about how defensive thinking, and defensive panic, it allows for a system that can allow us to move more towards development.
So when you say creating or scheming gravity, I guess we can call it, are you picturing situations where it's like more like the Hawks situation, where you're creating closeouts that are, for one reason or another, kind of more generous in their behavior to the level of respect that the shooter actually warrants? Or are you saying, which is kind of what I interpreted as, the ability to take, or to coach a player to basically exist without gravity but have it matter less?
I would say it's somewhere in between the two. I know it's a shitty answer, but like, that's sort of where it's like, I think that these things matter, like in the same way that you said, like, you know, people are getting closeouts like they're 50% shooters. It's like, okay, can you get a closeout? Like, can we get a dude who shoots 28% to get a closeout like a 34% shooter?
Mm-hmm.
Just degrees help, angles help. Okay, so are they getting a little bit out of shell? Is there going to have to be a small communication because a player is one half step further outside of their, you know, non-shooter rotation than they normally would be? Like, it can be elements like Stampede, which I'll get into in part 2, which should be out in a couple of weeks. But like, there are so many ways, I think, of generating gravity that like aren't really seen as such, because like, we're not saying turn like dudes who can't shoot into Steph. What we're saying is that it's not a non-starter. It just requires a little bit more creativity and more of a willingness to shuffle the other players on the floor. Like, you can have a non-shooter, but like, what if they're a really good passer going right? It's like, cool, so we're going to put them in movement going right and seeing if we can get a defense outside of their shell. And anything you get beyond what would be the average is additional gravity. Like, shell going under every single time, if you can get a step of change, that's gravity. That's
and is the crux of that then essentially just adding space to closeouts they do receive?
No, it's not space.
Okay.
So in the piece I said, the challenge now is for shooters, and the exercise for shooters is to make each closeout as dramatically individualistic as possible, to strain defenders to think extra about new routing and potential outcomes for every closeout, to create an offense that rigorously enforces defensive nuance. So it's not to say we want space, it's to say we want defenders not to be able to turn their brains off. Oh, we're going under that pick and roll. Cool. Like, I know that. I can make that rotation with my eyes closed. But what if we set a weird screen on the second side, so now it's a little bit more funky, and now they have to communicate twice, or they don't know the footwork for it. Suddenly we're in a new situation, and even if they're still going under, them being at a suboptimal angle can turn my 6'9" power forward who attacks into a layup because their shoulders aren't square and they haven't set up a wall. That's gravity.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we don't see it because it doesn't look like Steph.
Got it.
Damage space has many forms, and not all suboptimal spacing is alike. Plays, actions, concepts, all offensive principles built around a simple concept. Invade space and cause a cavalcade of corresponding decisions where the defense can become bogged down. Making a defense think is a win. So it's to say, like, yeah, even in our 6'9", primary creator example, if he's off by a step, if he's off by a quarter step and off by 10 degrees on his shoulder angle, that means that the help defender has to adjust, which means that's a conversation. And then the helper has to adjust because that's a conversation. And each one of those is a corresponding decision that like is a better representation of gravity than like getting a super hard closeout.
Got it. I completely agree with that. I love that way of thinking about it.
Okay, so now we have this. We now have this framework. Is everybody kind of with this so far? Is this making sense? Just a quick chat check. How we doing with this, guys? We have not had a crash, so it seems like we're back up to normal. Thank you guys, as always, for joining me. We are deep in the weeds. Mm-hmm. Greatly appreciate it. So now we have this idea of like create extra thinking, and extra thinking can come in so many different pathways. So like, okay, now I have these thoughts. The first thing I got to do is find some movement shooting data. So yeah, here's the thing about movement shooting data. It doesn't really exist, like on a broad scale. And when I say like a broad scale, I mean like thinking about trying to track this longitudinally on multiple levels. So trying to track high school to college to NBA, like you can find some of it, but you can't find trends in the same way that like I can think of like 100 different pieces about off the dribble shooting, right? You know, whether they're profiles, whether it's, you know, analysis. I can think of a whole bunch of people who've written it about a whole bunch of different ways. Can anybody here think of one about movement shooting that's like data driven, or like, you know, talks about like trend stuff or year over year development? It kind of doesn't exist. And I spent a long time trying to find it. I read a ton of papers. I went through every data repository I could. And for me, the biggest part was finding it publicly available. Which isn't to say like the data doesn't exist, but I was thinking about it like, how could a person who just wants to learn more about this investigate it? Not necessarily a person who has, you know, wants to learn about the NBA. I was trying to, for this series, I'm thinking about how NBA insights can be used to help grassroots development, going from, you know, the youngest ages all the way up. Like, so NBA data is interesting, but it's not really the nugget that I'm after. And it led me to this one paper called "Understanding Features of Successful 3-Point Shots in the NBA." It's from the smart people over there at MIT. You have Nate Bailey, Karen Bokwaka, Hinley, and Tim Jong. And I thought I had found it. Like the yelp I let out when I read this paper. So basically, it's like I think it's 2016 data, 2015 data, whatever the last year of scraping was. Back when all this stuff was like super publicly available. And they're just trying to say like how, you know, for catch and shoots, you know, how fast were you going before? And the paper didn't have exactly what I was looking for, but it had enough that I could, you know, thinking I could backmask this into some like, you know, oh, the defender distance, and like I can take this category, this, you know, super group and call it movement threes. And then I like got further into the paper, and, you know, all fantastic stuff. And I skipped like one really important sentence, which was their definition of catch and shoots. And it kind of made my blood run cold, because I realized the problem. Like, I was looking for movement shooting and looking for it in like a data locked way, and looking for everybody to have an agreement that like, oh yeah, movement threes are these things. And I realized it didn't exist, because I saw this definition of catch and shoots, and I'd never defined a catch and shoot, because it's like, it's a fucking catch and shoot. Like, like it does what it says in the name or on the tin. Like it's not hard. But then I saw this and I was like, okay, that's not my definition. Like this would not be the one that I would have. And that's the poison fruit here. The reason why I spend so much time defining gravity and all this stuff is because there has never been these larger conversations. Can't find the data I want, because like, what's a movement three? What's a catch and shoot three? And like, all of this information doesn't matter if that's not my definition, because like I couldn't necessarily use it because I can't go run the numbers myself under my definition. And like, again, this really hurt, because I was like dancing around my apartment. And like, these distinctions do have downstream repercussions beyond mere labels. My idea was to study the translation between being good at one area and being good at another area, and seeing like, okay, so if you're, which is the better pathway to develop a movement shooter? Would you rather be a really good off the dribble shooter who becomes a movement shooter, or a really good catch and shoot shooter who becomes a movement shooter? But like, I can't even look at those ideas if one of them doesn't exist, and the definitions for the other two are entirely subjective in conversations I've never had. Because like, why would you ever sit down and ask like why a catch and shoot is? And like, I can guess that there's a linear relationship, because like, being good at shooting seems like it would be helpful at being good at another part of shooting. But that's not really helpful if I'm trying to help an agent, or trying to help, you know, a 17-year-old be like, hey, look, there's like, people don't know this yet, but like, this is where the money's going to be. Like, or if, hey, people have been doing it this way, and there's actually a whole different way of developing, like, that could be faster. What if like somehow, and I'm not suggesting this because I don't have the data for it, that like off the dribble shooters were way more likely to be movement shooters? And like, you can find a wonderful anecdotal argument for getting there, but there's not anything to point to. And at first I like wanted to be like, this is a whole conspiracy that like they've been hiding this movement shooting at you. And I was like, no, the problem is that like I couldn't do it. I couldn't tell you what NBA.com's definition of movement 3 is. And I couldn't tell you what anybody's definition of any of these things are because it's just not conversations that we have. In my hunt for meaningful papers, I stumbled upon the best paper on, or the best writing on basketball I've ever come across. It is by a woman named Sharon Drysdale. It's her PhD thesis, I believe, for the University of Iowa. It is called A Cinematographic and Comparative Analysis of Basketball Jump Shot. And it is the closest thing I've ever come to like some of these ideas of a person just being like, hey, I am going to vouch for the idea of shooting. And it's, you know, it's from 1972. It is, my copy is like, it has been like telefaxed to somebody. And there's never been clearer writing on basketball. Her definition of touch is the ability to gauge distance and deliver the ball on target with nice hand-eye coordination. And like the word nice there is like what the cherry on top, because like with good doesn't really do it, but like nice is just, it's such a perfect idea. Like every floater you've ever seen just like satisfactorily like plop into the rim, that's a nice floater. Like that's the perfect word. And that's how all of this is written. And it led me to the idea of like, look, this may not be your definition of what touch is, but the ability to offer it clearly, the ability to say, this is my best distillation of these ideas, is a extremely meaningful advancement in basketball. Like there is currently a lot of extremely high level conversations. And what this piece, writing this piece, is really hammered home for me is that like the foundational things, the things I've been missing. The willingness to sound really dumb and have the Sharon Drysdales of the future hammer me. As I mean, she goes and gets like, you know, reads the biographies of, you know, the Silver Age coaches. So there's a lot of insane opinions about like why jumping backwards gives you better backspin on jumpers, or like why kicking your legs back like is very helpful for like 3 movement shots. Insane stuff now. But when we look at Drysdale's work, like we can see the chart on the left is everything that goes into a good jumper. There are 28 factors on that list. And like this to me is like the most cutting edge idea in the world, that like you could write down everything you think goes in and then try to test it. And then, you know, be like, okay, well, how much do you think it matters? Giving this list to somebody would be like more meaningful than, you know, any of the studies I could have found, because it's like, okay, this is what we're trying to find. What we're actually trying to find is what we can really look at. What do we think matters? And so I did my best to take this spirit onto the work that we have at hand. And me and you and everybody who was involved with Let's Watch Film last year, which we're starting to get into swing officially now with this, throughout this term 5-tool shooter. And it was sort of like an offhand thing that we kind of like promised to do later, and later's come. And one of the things I did kind of for fun was ask people, hey, is this a movement 3 or not on Twitter? I don't think this might be the actual shot that I used, but like, and asked, hey, is this a movement 3 or is this catch and shoot, and why? And the list that I got was like pretty wild. Some people said yes, and like the reasons were things I agreed with. Other ones were ways I had never thought about it. And, you know, it led me down a pathway of being like, there is more value in attempting to be wrong than there is in like sort of taking these broad numbers and accepting them. So I did my best and tried to define what the 5 tools of shooting in my eyes are. And a tool here is like used pretty casually. Like it's probably not a word I would be attached to long term. That's what we called it, so that's what I called it now. So we took the 3 types of shooting earlier: catch and shoot, movement, and off the dribble, and then added 2 additional categories: volume and flow. Just to give overviews, we're going to dive into each one of these and how my conception of them work. Catch and shoot, we've spent quite a bit of time on. Movement, off the dribble being shooting off the dribble. Volume is how many threes can you get up. There is quite a difficulty with this as you get into the the difference between a 60th percentile shooter and a 90th percentile shooter. Many people have watched the All-Star game. I feel like that is a good representation of what elite volume looks like. And then flow is one that like I don't love the name for it, but I think the idea is really valuable, which is like how fragile.
Oh, I love it.
How fragile are your jumpers? And so like, do all of your jumpers have to come the same way? Like there's a guy that I used to play with when I was really young. He's one of my dad's friends, and he would only take like one type of jumper. It was like catch and shoot. Like he could not dribble. He shot over the head. It took 6 seconds to release, but if he shot it from the left corner, it went in every time. He's like 65 years old, wore a headband tilted all the way back like Wayne Chisholm, and like did not miss. I was like 11 and just gobsmacked. But like he couldn't shoot anything else. Didn't take any other shot. It was that or like runouts, which were like walkouts because he was old. But like there are players who have extraordinary variability, whether it's through footwork, and that's what the idea of flow is. So the 3 types of shots and the 2 circumstances of shots is, I guess, like the taxonomy here. Okay, so off the dribble. My definition: if a player dribbles, is off the dribble 99% of the time. I would consider like when you do like Trey likes to take a pound dribble before he does catch and shoot. Sometimes to me that's still a catch and shoot. If the dribble has to mean something, to me that's pretty straightforward. This is kind of I know there's a lot of text. It's easier than okay. So this is my attempt to draw a flowchart. And I wanted to do this because it's going to come into play later when we talk about training these ideas. Okay, so each one of these is the steps. That's why I've numbered them, and it sort of corresponds to the text line. Didn't work exactly just because graphic design is not my passion. So like basically, if you go down the blue arrow, that's our shot. So for this is going to be off the dribble. So like to follow the blue arrow is to get to an off the dribble jumper. If you take another decision, it goes literally any other basketball choice. So like the first one is like, you're dribbling and you have court mapping. You have to read, what the defense is doing. You have to read their body, you have to read their shoulders, you have to read which direction, you have to read the help side defenders, like read the moment. If you decide not to swing the ball, don't worry about it. But if you, if you do that and you move towards the next step, this scan visually for everybody, I can explain it further. If not, I didn't really know the best way to draw this without like there was not a clip art for flowchart despite my best intention to do so. Okay, does this scan visually to you, Ward?
Yeah, for sure.
The over arrows are a little bit funky, and I didn't want to make them 2 because it would just kind of go nowhere. It was weird. I didn't also want to like draw all of the decisions because basketball's a lot of decisions. But like, okay, so executing. So you read the court, then you make your move. Whatever move it is to get open, you do that. So we'll go like hang hard cross. You go hang hard cross. You create space. Now you have to read. Is this enough space to get my jumper off? If the answer is yes, you move down the line to footwork, balance, self-organization. You go from wherever the moments you are to get into your shot. You set your feet. You get on balance. You have to flow from whatever moment you're in into the beginning of your jumper. And then the 5th one's just make the shot. So now you're in your shot. You have to do like jumper stuff. And now we're in a yes, no, does it go? So this is, to me, like the basic flow. I mean, you can argue for whether something belongs or not, but I was just trying to get as granular as possible without getting overly granular. So far, so good?
Good with me.
Okay, that was the easy one. Yeah, just yell through the screen if I'm wrong. The branching pathways is not just passing away. It could just be like anything, like deciding not to dribble or going into a DHO or deciding to do something else. But it's more like if you think of these as like like RPG dialogue trees, it's just like you're talking down to get to the question you actually want to ask. Shout out to Bethesda heads in the chat. But like it could just be you could do court mapping and decide to just like take a pull-up 3 instead of doing a move to take it, or making your move and then driving. Like every one of these has a way to get to just literally any other action. And if you wanted to, you could map out the decision tree to go from court mapping to underhanded scoop layup. But we just wanted to get to this particular one. It's not the best way of showing like broad decision making, but to show a genealogy of decisions, I think it works well enough. Okay, catch and shoot. So some of the common threads I found in Twitter responses was that like anything that does not dribble is a catch and shoot. The second one was that like if movement was essential for the shot or the creation of the shot, then it was not. Then then it wasn't a catch and shoot. So the movement is anyone where the movement is essential. Those are both binaries. Then like the more spectromatic ones would be like difficulty of movement or alignment. So like if you have to like backpedal or like the movement is like beyond what would be like just sort of normally happen. Like if you shake a little bit, it's catch and shoot. But if you're like sprinting with a flare and you have to hop to get it, and you're catching it way outside your body, like that's a movement 3. And then the last spectromatic one is single tasking. So like, were you ready to shoot? Did you have to go hunt the ball when it was in air? And I think that all of these are like really important. It also speaks to like the single tasking is like really, really granular, and zero dribbles just like, dude, did you dribble? And like this both represents the like how broad this category is, but also just the reality of like there's not a consensus on this stuff. So this is my best interpretation of it. Give me one moment. Sorry for you want to read this for me, Ward? Sorry, my heater is going off and the microphone is right by
it. No problem. I mean, the only thing, I don't want to again jump ahead of ourselves here, but for me a lot of it comes down to obviously given the graph we looked at earlier, part of what we do at SIS is tracking types of shots. And so on a day-to-day basis, I do watch plenty of shots and have to decide if they're off movement, catch and shoot. And without getting too, granular into like our process or anything, I just think so much of what leads to my decision in those situations is such a lazy and kind of lousy answer to put out. But as like a shooter, like personally, thinking about the sort of like posterior chain requirements of the shot, like it all revolves a lot to me around how much you're asking of like your core, your ass, your hips, and your feet to get the shot off in an organized way. And when I say organized, obviously it looks different for different people. Like, there are the Jordan Pooles of the world that can launch a shot with, or Cam Thomas is a great example, with their feet perpendicular to the basket and figure it out in the air. And obviously there are guys like Kispert who need both toes pointing directly at the rim for it to really work out. But so much of it is the demand placed on your sort of biomechanical alignments leading into the shot, which I think is a lot of what you're getting at with that third point. But for example, on that clip we showed, there's a very similar shot that occurs in that same exact action, all things identical for me, where if he's the closeout is half a second slower and he is 20 or whatever 6 feet more ahead of the play, running into that shot, it's catch and shoot given all the same foot pattern, whatever. Like if he's 3 miles per hour slower going into that shot, it's all of a sudden it's a catch and shoot shot, which is the fun of this. And I think for me, just the crux of that is like placing how much you have to demand of your physical sort of alignment is.
Yeah. And I think that the NBA is also like the worst playground for this, because they're just the wildest athletes capable of like incomprehensible.
It's a horrible playground.
Yeah, like it's just the worst place to do these definitions. And like I stand with you in solidarity for having to make some of these calls, because like I don't have these answers. Like my best attempt at definition is a 3-point attempt where the shooter has the opportunity to read the defense and see the rim before the attempt, and where the movement or dribbling were not essential to the creation of the shot attempt. And like this is a goddamn nightmare for like a machine learning thing. Like if you're just to like feed this to like the above head cameras, they'd be like, yeah, please send our regards to this man when he perishes. Like read the defense and see the rim before the attempt. Like what is the thing that you're looking for to confirm those? And like to me, this is more about the training element, the developmental element, than like the logging element. But it's to say like this is how you know what you're seeing, what you're asking for is more catch and shoot or more movement, so to how to pressurize those development opportunities in that way. I'm not going to bother you guys with like clips of what's a catch and shoot. At least I don't think I did. like the specific parts here, because like you guys, like that definition kind of speaks for itself, and the whole imparsibility of it. So like here's my progression, and everyone's progression is going to be different if your definition is different, but also like at each one of these, like to me there is a drill. At each one of these there is a way of pressurizing that decision making process to better train the elements that lead to shots. And like this goes to the overall point of this series, which is like, if y'all are so good at, if we have shooting down to a science, how come people are bad shooters? Like straight up, like I know, like I've seen NBA players work out. I know NBA players, like they work insanely hard. How come everybody doesn't shoot 40% free? And like if even expanding this, if reps worked, like if reps as a developmental philosophy worked, how come there are bad shooters in college? Because like college players take enough threes. They definitely take enough threes to like be the level of shooter that like reps theory would claim. But the answer is that like that reps don't solve some of these decision-making processes that lead to bad shots, that lead to suboptimal shooting, or don't even like work on the elements that are like a player's actually bad at. They might be great shooters, but they're terrible self-organizers. So like, why are you having them have clean catches? Anyway, that is the purpose of this in broad. So court mapping, shooter plots out defender locations and passing angles from teammates, plans on how to move the small assistants to get the cleanest shot. So like small shakes, eyes to rim. The longer a shooter can have a quiet eye period to calibrate shooting distance, the more likely it is that they shoot well. I have linked studies there. Basically, if you can look at the rim, like there's a stronger chance that you shoot well. You know, close your eyes, and like the second you open your eyes, throw it at something, your aim will be terrible. If you open your eyes and stare at it, you're more likely to hit it. You know, it's basic life. Or play Mario Party, like randomly closing your eyes. Best of luck. Footwork, balance of organization. The player cleans up whatever footwork, momentum stuff to be shot ready. So sometimes you're not going to be entirely shot ready, but you've had your eyes to your rim. And if you have enough self-organization ability, you're probably going to be able to overcome that. Shot perception, player makes a dribble pass shoot decision with the added insight, because you've seen what's happening. Like you were able to look around, you know what's like the defense is generally, and they can't have moved that much since you would look to catch the ball, and then you make the decision to take the shot. Obviously there is quite a bit of nuance and gray in here, but to me this is this is broad enough to include most types of catch and shoot, but has enough flexibility that like you can make a call on like, okay, so a player didn't really have an opportunity to read the rim. This is most likely like the movement is more important than the catching and shooting part. Any particular questions on that one, or like this way of looking at the world?
I do find the finding the rim qualifier interesting, because I mean, I guess I was thinking about that while you're talking about it. It does make plenty of logical sense. I'm trying to picture a situation in which I would classify a shot as catch and shoot without that. And like the only thing I can come up with is like a pitch back DHO where it's or something, you know, where there's an exchange of the ball and it immediately returns to the person who threw the first pass. And like if you are throwing the first pass, then you're not getting it back, and you get it back, and then you're relocating in the middle of the shot and you're rebalancing at the rim with your eyes while you've already kind of began like the footwork balance self-organization process.
Again, this is why the NBA is the worst playground for this, because that doesn't happen with seventh graders. Like, again, if you use the NBA as the barometer, you're going to have a bad time. Like, I'm just trying to think of like this is a global, you know, idea. So now we come to the granddaddy of them all, movement. The normal thing, the thing that any like rational human being would do, and again, like spending this long on shooting is like the proof positive that I'm, you know, not a well-adjusted person, would just make the movement the inverse of the catch and shoot, which would just be like, it's, you know, any attempt where movement is essential to the shot and the shooter has to adjust the defense as well as the shooter's positioning on the fly. Like you don't get to look at the rim, you don't get to look at, you know, where you are, you don't have a moment to, you know, do the proprioceptive thing. You just catch, you gotta fire. And it doesn't have to necessarily be like sprinting away from the rim, but it's just like you were so busy moving that you couldn't look around. And like to me, that's not entirely like that's a solid definition, but I think that like there's a better step that could be taken. And like I kind of cheated and just made it a checklist. So a movement shot is a shot where a shooter cannot pause to read the dribble pass shoot situation without losing advantage. So like if you come off, you know, an Iverson cut and you catch and hold, that's no longer a movement 3. Even if it's like a half-second hold, like you took a second to have the little, like, you know, ring of death spin and then decided to shoot. So like not a movement 3. If the shooter has to engage multiple variable patterns to get the shot off, like basically every movement 3 meets this category. It's like if you just slide, like if you're just doing a 30-step shake, if you shake from like one corner to the other, but you're just moving horizontally, like just like doing a crab walk, that's still not a movement 3. Because like it's just not that hard. You still got to look at the rim. You didn't have to turn your body. Like basically, if you have to turn your body in 2 different directions at any point, like it's a movement 3. And if the defender is leveraged between choosing, I used the word between twice. It's the defender is leveraged between their responsibilities to help defender and preventing the shot attempt. So if the movement makes the defender make a decision between what they should be doing and what they should be doing, so like putting them in a real jackpot situation, if all 3 of those conditions are met, which again, most of them are met in most movement 3s, like most movement situations, anything like, you know, people would classify like, you know, Iverson cuts or like uphill DHOs, like those challenge the defender to have to make a read on whether they would like to stay on ball or try to like shoot gaps or whatever. If you meet all 3 of those, it's a movement 3. If it's like 2 3/4, we can talk. That's the best I have for movement. I tried to make it as broad as possible to include the lower levels, because for lower levels, this is a lot more clear. And then as you get to the NBA, obviously you're just going to have higher granularity just because there's so much more granularity in so much that's possible. All right. I'm willing to accept criticism this one time on one day.
I actually like this one a lot. I don't really know what I would change about it. I'm trying to think. I mean, yeah, my brain is so fried from the NBA stuff we do that it's like very my proxies these days are NBA and me and my pickup games, and I don't find a hole in this with those 2 proxies, so I'm okay to move ahead with it.
Okay, yeah. I mean, like, to me, just having like this rough sketch is better than what I was operating with before, which is like I know it when I see it, which is just not a good definition.
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
it's not an operant definition. It's also not like, look, this is not necessarily something you could feed to a machine learning algorithm, but it's something, and it's something I can at least test against. And like, if that's the Drysdale theory, it's like just write down something that other people can test that you can try to learn from, and not like knowing when I see it is just a way of saying I don't like being wrong. And like nobody like don't put in the newspaper I was wrong, but like I'm trying to be as wrong as possible. So in that spirit, here is the flow chart for that. Court mapping: shooter reads the defender and scheme to plot out options for next steps and set up best angles. Then you have setup, play type, and getting open. Obviously you have counters, counters, cells, fakes, everything possible. You have to be able to get open. Which is also why shot selection for off-ball shooters is a hilarious concept, because mostly it's just like they're terrible at this. Footwork, balance, self-organization. So now you've gotten open. You have to be able to turn getting open into like balance. Dribble, pass, shoot decision on the catch. You have your first opportunity to really read, and it has to be a snap decision. Eye to rim shot perception. So like once you've made the snap decision of like, do I shoot it or not? You get to look at the rim, and like this is now just shot making, and like that. I think so much of when we talk about movement shooting is just steps 5 and 6, and that's, again, this goes to why are there bad shooters, is because like reps is just 5 and 6. Like you do 1 the first time you take the first shot, you walk over to your spot, you're gonna catch it 100 times, shoot it 100 times, but like you're just doing 1, 5, 6. But how many shooters are bad shooters because they struggle to understand where they are on the court? Very few. Most of them are that like they're bad decision makers. They have delays, or they think, or they struggle to self-organize. I'm like, yeah, need reps to come up on the screen to talk about it. Okay, so now let's get into the more loose concepts. Volume. There is a hard ceiling on the amount of good shots one player can take. That number changes based on, like what offense you run, who you're playing against. Obviously, if you're playing, like super inferior competition, it might be 30, but like it's not 31. So can a shooter outshoot bad shooters with bad shots? So like is a bad, to like put this as plainly as possible. If you double tapped. would you rather have Steph taking Tony Snell shots or Tony Snell taking Steph shots? Which isn't to say like Tony Snell is not like a bad shooter, he's an excellent shooter, but like Tony Snell is not an off the dribble shot creator. Which one do you think has a bigger delta?
This is a question I ask myself every Monday, or not really Monday, but Friday and Saturday when I go and play pickup. And it's not to toot my own horn, but like that, I mean, at a certain point, obviously there's a lot of contextual factors there. Like I'm not trying to be an asshole when I play with people that I don't really know. But suffice to say, my pickup runs here are not quite to the level they were in college, or even in LA when we would play with guys who played in college or played pro. But essentially, I think that it's you said bigger delta, you mean sort of like higher return on investment,
what's
right?
What's the bigger difference?
Yeah, I think you'd rather have such a funny question. I think it would be Tony Snell taking Steph shots would be worse.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Yeah.
And like that's an excellent shooter. Like what we're really talking about is like, would you rather have Steph taking who's the nicest person I could slander with this on the Warriors? Insert Warrior who's not like one of the core Warriors. That I will keep us both out of trouble and just say, what's your imagination, pick a Warrior.
The audience can handle that one.
Yes. Yeah. So like if there is a limit on good shots, then the system has to create the best worst shots possible or the best bad shots possible. And the player has to be able to get there. And there are dudes who can't take like bad shots. Franz Wagner at Michigan did not take bad shots. It was infuriating. Again, this is the mid-range concept that we've talked about for the past 20 years, but just set to a much, much, much higher difficulty. Whatever the level is, there is a number of how many shots a player can have and what point per possession trade-off their bad shots are worth. And like this can all feel abstract. Go watch Iowa women's basketball games. Come back to me. Like Caitlin Cooper or Caitlin Clark is shout out Caitlin Cooper always, but Caitlin Clark is Caitlin Clark, the Caitlin Cooper of basketball, but playing it versus analysis. Like come back and say like a good possession ends with a good shot. Like no, sometimes it's just like a fuck you jumper is the best shot you're gonna get, and like live with that. And that's a huge endpoint, but like you can see this represented on players who are very good shooters but just don't take enough threes. And there are going to be guys who are probably 95th like shooting talent, but don't get higher up the scale because the 5% that they're missing is just taking shots that are beyond them. And the other idea sort of dovetails with this. They might be nested concepts in the future, and it's flow. And like I think bad shooting or tough shots is a part of this, but it's the ability of a player to shoot out of randomness, or more accurately, out of messiness. Can they find extra little pockets on shakes? Can they reestablish rhythm on pump fakes and still shoot a good ball? Can they shoot without a dip if needed? Can they speed up the release if pressured? Can they shoot out of weird footwork? Can they shoot off balance? Can they shoot turned away from the rim? How close to a shot block does the defenders have to be to change their release? Shout out Malik Monk, the literal best I've ever seen with this. Like he just doesn't see them. To put it simply, how resilient is the idea of a clean shot for that player? And there are fantastic examples. To me, the like overall best at this is Michael Porter Jr. Like the embodiment of the idea of flow is because like no contest matters to him, but also like he will just shoot out of like really tough situations, and he will just find the shots that he needs to take. And if he has an angle to shoot, he will find the footwork, whether it's his jumper, whether it's taking a slightly different version of his jumper, whether it's taking, a footwork he likes, a footwork he doesn't really like, a sidestep, whatever. He will find the jumper that he wants, and he will take the one that is available. And like his shooting is extremely resilient. And like on the other hand, we have the 65-year-old that my dad used to hoop with that cooked me, just always cooked me. I would dig off the strong side corner. I learned my lesson really young, but like his was ultra fragile. His jumper was ultra fragile. There was a very small circumstance for him to shoot what he considered a good ball. Michael Porter Jr., the widest circumstance. Everything's a good ball. And like some of this is limited by a player's ability. If you have a great handle, obviously, like more is open to you. If you know are much better off movement, more is open to you. But I think that it's just a broad base in a way that like volume is an expression of this, but they're more interrelated than like truly one idea.
I think the message I sent you, MPJ is a great call out. I said, I think Patty Mills is another one, especially I think he's an interesting concept because of how small he is and how that scale shifts. And it's a very interesting case study for kind of the combination of volume and flow that you were just talking about is Davis Bertans to me, because that is a guy who, I mean, it feels even kind of funny saying it just because obviously he had years in the past where the percentages lined up with the ability, but he clearly has a shooting ability that can be interpreted almost purely by volume and flow if you've only watched from the past year and a half.
Yeah.
Whereas he will take the craziest shots, falling down 2 feet facing the sideline, like, and he will do them at any point of possession. He'll do them in transition, like has no problem getting him up. But recently just hasn't been making them. And so you can watch that guy and the answer of is that guy a good shooter or not depends a lot on how much you have attached to these two ideas of what they actually define as shooting.
Yeah. And you also have guys the other way, guys who attempt to be really like resilient, like flow shooters. I don't know how we're going to conjugate this or whatever, but like guys who are like just, you know, just really intensely like want to be every type of shooter, and they're just not. Like they have one type of shot that they take. Like they should only take like 3 really like categories of shots. Like you know, I've coached guys who like want to be messy footwork shooters, and it's just like it's not. No, you need a dribble. Let's regather. Like you just can't shoot messy. And so like this cuts both ways. Like this could be guys who need to do more, but it also could be shooters that are much less talented as shooters, but much more specific of shooters. Which is why, like I said, the test for flow is how similar are players makes within a shot type. So when thinking about like, okay, let's look at all of their off the dribble jumpers, like how similar do they look? Or how similar are the context? How similar are the setups? How similar are the off movement stuff? Like again, movement is a huge category. Like maybe they only like pin downs. Maybe they only like 1-2s. Maybe they only, you know, like flares are like insanely hard if you're a hop shooter. Like you can run backwards and jump on 2 feet while moving backwards, and then don't have your body move backwards when you shoot, and also throw it 30 feet pinpoint accuracy, and there's a dude sprinting at you, screaming at you, and 20,000 people are watching. And if you miss enough of those, they just like you don't play anymore. That's not reasonable. And like so like there are, you know, specificities within it, but like what we have to think about is you know this is you know related to shot perception. This is related to volume as concepts. And what we're trying to see is much more about like seeing these things as spectrums. I'm gonna run up and grab my charger because I had it upstairs. Yeah. If you wouldn't mind chewing scenery for about 3 minutes? Really
I'm happy to.
Actually, I don't need 3 minutes. I'm gonna sprint up and down the stairs. Hopefully, Jojo doesn't sprint in, because she's going to probably just be like, "Oh, people."
I will happily ramble about flow. I mean, again, under the guise of pickup now becoming a dominant form of my evaluation of these ideas, you do start to see, I mean, I personally think that it's different for me because I'm just somewhat tuned to this stuff already, given my interest in stuff like this exact article. But flow, I think, also is a little bit more compounding than the other skills. Like I think volume is an interesting one because of how volume in itself is still reliant on, in similar to our earlier conversation, it's somewhat reliant on it being important based off of like response from others. You can shoot a ton and just like let the percentages play out, and I think a lot of people would probably take that as a fine outcome, depending on what level of shooter you are. Obviously, you want Steph getting up 33s in a game, that's probably going to end poorly for you, as it did for team whatever last night. But the difference, PD, I'm just going on about how volume and flow. For me, volume is like, it's still of these 5 sort of tools that we labeled them, that it's pretty hinged on response. Still, like, you can. I have a feeling that if Franz thought that he was being asked to shoot by defenses all the time, it would eventually turn him into a volume shooter. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so it's different, but in flow becomes like a representation of volume, or like a proxy at a certain point, where you can sort of like not extrapolate, because I mean, at a certain point, volume does just kind of speak for itself. But usually high flow guys don't have problems being high volume guys, but you can obviously have high flow guys be low volume guys, and that is sort of an interesting wrinkle to figure out as someone trying to develop that 5th skill.
Another fun category is like flow is less determined by coaching than volume is.
Mm-hmm.
Because
for
like
sure,
like coaches can't tell you to, like, can't force you to not catch dirty. But like coaches can be like, you are only catching, like, if you like, flow is more deep or interdependent and volume is more dependent. Like, if you're just told like, oh yeah, you stand in the corner, there's only like so many shots you can take. Like, your volume is being artificially deflated, even if you are like very capable of shooting on weird catches. But if you're, running around all the time, like, that's much more on the player to not get the volume up. So there is obviously like a with everything, there's an organizational, interpersonal team dynamic happening as well, which makes this really fun for evaluation purposes. So next is sort of like future ideas, and we're about at the end. So like, this is just other ways of thinking about these things, which we kind of talked about. And like the first one just being sort of like putting it on the continuum that we had earlier with the 3 general shooting categories. We're like, okay, how much of his volume is like, where does his volume rank? Or, just putting it on the same spectrum. Obviously, like, it's going to require some retooling, because like, how do you measure flow? But like, that's a way of thinking about it. The second way would be thinking about like of keeping the bar as the same, the same way, but saying like, this volume for this archetype is this much, and the shots are this different. So to take the 3 categories and their dispersal as a flow idea, of being like, for a guy to be mostly catch and shoot, we represent that. We see that as like a lower flow prospect. The final one would just be sort of like thinking of it as a matrix of like, as a yes, no. So I just listed, 6 good shooters, and I erased it just for the getting them to line up was not easy. So I just cut it. But, I think there's a lot of ways of expressing this in terms of like how scouting actually works. And like, I haven't really industrialized that yet, but they're more concepts that like I'm trying to think out loud, and that's sort of the purpose of this series for me, is to think them out loud to see if they're helpful to other people. And like, as I move forward with this project, because I have another like 50 pages on like how to actually develop these ideas, like in terms of training and in terms of broad shooting, like in terms of like, what do you, so you now say you're a person, say you're a coach watching this, and you now like have this, modality. You now think about shooting in this way. Like, you'd say for, you're the cursed person who believes everything me and Ward have just said. Like, I fear for you intensely. I'm really sorry, but like, imagine that you're a coach who feels that way. Like, what do you actually do now? And like, that's sort of what the second half is about, is like, well, one, answering the original question of like, how do you inflate gravity artificially through movement? And the second one being like, and how do you train players to have more interrelationship or more flow between movement ideas or shooting styles? Okay. Before we do questions, let's hit out plugs. Hold up, jump around. So yeah, give me another plug for the Playing in Space podcast.
Sure. Went through it a little bit earlier. I can do an abbreviated version, but it's going to be very fun. Basically, to go a little bit more in detail, it is NBA podcast focused on how interpreting our data can lead to conclusions and what those conclusions mean for the rest of the league. Hoping to stay a little bit more sort of the oscillation between macro and micro on NBA podcasts can often be sort of like, who deserves this award versus who's playing well this week. I think our plan will be a little bit more, here is what such and so's skills look like in this setting, macro then being what does that make them as a fit on such and such team, things like that. It'll be really fun. We already, like I said earlier, we recorded episode 1. It comes out Wednesday. Guests will be a very fun list. I'm thinking it's probably going to be a mix of like SIS employees and some outside friends, and not only friends, just outside basketball minds that would make sense to have on. It's going to be a blast. It also won't just be, I should say, it intentionally, we have NBA in the name, but it's also just called the Basketball Podcast as opposed to an NBA podcast, because I think there will be room for, we won't be talking draft at all, but there'll be room for sort of larger kind of philosophical discussions as well. It's kind of similar to this one that we just had, honestly.
I'm sure you're going to get deep into that FIBA 3-on-3 offensive philosophy.
I mean, I could probably talk about that for 3 hours. But similar to that, yeah, stuff that aligns that way. And yeah, we're very excited.
Well, thank you. My plug is for the 2022 wildcard piece that I should have out tomorrow. I just have a little bit of editing to do. Unfortunately, this took quite a bit of time. And it's just guys who may be in the draft, ? Some have been declared eligible. Some we are waiting to hear. Some there are rumors. It's people who could make this draft a lot more interesting. People who, either like have some potential eligibility or like are more like rumored to be eligible. And I watched a lot of games to cover a lot of ground. So yeah, quite a bit there. It's going to be fun. Okay. So I think we have enough time for like 10 minutes of Q&A. Mm-hmm. 1 second. All right. Well, I took a small break to get this charger, so I don't necessarily need a break. So I'm going to put out the open call on Twitter for questions. We obviously have some limitations around what we can talk about. So if you have a question about a prospect, we're not going to do this time. We will do that next time, just to be considerate of our guests.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. You can always holler at me and I will gladly answer your questions later. Actually, no, we can answer questions at just the cost is $10,000 right now. So if you have $10,000, you can answer a question about a prospect each. So holler at that. Yeah. So those are the rules. $10K per question, and you can get an answer about draft prospects. If you have historical questions, we can absolutely answer that. And theoretical stuff as well. We will do the prospects next time with our next guest for part 2, which I'm working on. I have like 30,000 words on, and I'm hoping to get it out by mid-March, and we can have a second one of these. So yeah, call for Q&A. In the meantime, what is 3-on-3 FIBA the only place that Spain pick and roll doesn't work, or is it the place that pick and roll works best?
I think works best. That's just a fun one. I mean, it depends. This is dumb, but I feel like it. If I was getting spammed with that, I would just switch, and that would be my solution. But damn, I can't decide. I'll say works best. I'll say works best because I would run the hell out of it regardless.
Yeah, see, I think it works worst.
Really?
Yeah. I think that there are other pick and roll counters you can do that are more effective. Like if you run like jam, or like whatever you call the one, like the pick and roll where you have the wing like run through the pick and roll right before it starts. That is much more effective than Spain is. If you have athletic dudes running flat pick and roll where you have the screener face the rim and doesn't even worry about a screen, you're just trying to get a different type of coverage, and then you can just throw the lob if the big takes one step over, is more effective. I think Spain is too cute by a degree for a smaller court and takes too much time to set up. So I think that you can do better things faster.
Yeah, and I do think also too that my switching thing I think is actually probably the answer, because the way those teams are built, you can do that and be fine often.
Yeah. Any guesses on what my 3-on-3 team would be built with? Tyrus Thomas, you guessed it. 3 Tyrus Thomases. You're not switching that. Okay, I think we got enough time to get some questions in. We got some really fun ones. Ray asks, how are you doing today?
Right, thank you for asking. I'm doing well. Before this, had a little bit of work to do today, but had a slower day because it's the All-Star break. And I'd say the highlight so far is I've been running a little bit. I was running more when it was warmer outside. Haven't been running as much in the cold, but it was 44 outside today. So I did an 8-miler, which is the longest I've done, I think, since I've like really been starting running. So I'm more of a pace guy than a distance guy, and it was hard to break the mental barrier, but I got through it and we did it. So I'm doing well.
I'm doing good. I had a good coffee today. And listened to some music while I wrote most of this presentation, or adjusted most of it. I didn't get the aspect ratio right, so the formatting is a little funky, but all in all, pretty good. Bobby asks, are you familiar enough with Tim Thomas to talk about how you would have developed him in the modern era? Yes,
I'm not. Go ahead.
Okay, Tim Thomas. I mean, I think that many of the questions or many of the difficulties with like Tim Thomas are about like the differences in like the youth setup in like the era that he was coming up versus now. There's just so much more of an industrialization of youth basketball, and like there's just more, like, structure's not the word, but it's just like it's more formalized. And I think that a lot of Tim Thomas's issues were just like not floating as much and just having more challenging circumstances. Putting him in more context and playing in a more modern era would, like, a lot of the infrastructure would be more supportive of him. This could be the same question for like Renardo Sidney, but it's also that like Tim Thomas would have been a monster if that had been solved, because like we got a hint of like what like 20% of Tim Thomas looked like in Phoenix, and it was really scary. Noah asks, what are the most common physical pluses you see among strong movement shooters that you think contribute to the shooter's overall effectiveness? So like physical indicators, like most common physical indicators.
Interesting. I think it's, what do we define as physical? Because I think, sorry, I'll let you answer that. Go ahead.
Cheating. Okay, you're not cheating. You're just stealing answers from me. You just answer. You answer how you interpret, and you've stolen my answer, and you're a bad person.
Well, so I'm basically, the reason I ask is because a guy like Tyrese Halliburton. This is kind of, I guess, this is sort of the theme of the stream, but this is a fun gray area. I think just by default, anything with the dribble is off the dribble, as we said. But obviously there are like off dribble shots. Like I'm thinking of the classic Duncan Robinson chase into a DHO and then throw the ball out to get yourself an extra foot of space before going into the same footwork you're going to go into if you didn't dribble. And the reason I bring that up is I think a lot of it is, I think 90% of it is like core. Like you cannot be a good movement shooter with a weak core.
Yep.
And that's the biggest thing. And then of course all the things kind of connected to that in terms of balance. And I think start stop is actually kind of an interesting indicator in that way, because it's those skills are kind of intertwined with what muscular, I guess, processes are required. So I guess you can kind of extrapolate that as a handler. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, core was what I was going to say. The next one was like really like reactive feet, like having
Mm-hmm.
like very strong independent feet. Like there's not like a good way of saying it, but like you have to have like feet that are able to like respond to inputs really quickly, like
Mm-hmm.
no reactive delay, just because of how much like readjustment is happening. And like that is something that not everybody can do, especially like if you just run them through like the old fashioned like Rip Hamilton drills. Like some people just don't adjust as quickly, because like what you're really looking for is like how quickly can your feet self-organize and how quickly can they react. And then like the final thing is deceptive movement skills out of stop starts,
Mm-hmm.
because like you have to sell getting into stuff, and like it's very easy to watch the end of movement shooting, but like the very beginning is the really difficult part to like create the advantage that leads to chasing, because once you're in chase mode you're in control,
Mm-hmm.
but getting into that chase is really difficult, and it just takes so many reps to like to learn how to move like that, to learn like how to sell things, and a lot of exploration, and that's a thing that like off-ball shooters can't really do.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I think then flexibility is a natural thing to add to that conversation because of the advantage that gives you in your lead up.
Okay. I think we got time for like two more questions. I guess I'll ask my question for you, which is that like on the idea of translation for movement shooters, what is a time that you were wrong about somebody who wasn't a movement shooter becoming one? So like a player that you believed would translate into a movement shooter and failed, and what do you attribute that to? Like, you don't have to name names necessarily, but like X player did, I thought was going to shoot because of these reasons. It turned out to be wrong. This is how it changed my belief.
It's just funny because I think one of our first conversations ever was we touched on the shooting projection of Isaac Okoro. This is a tough question to answer because I probably like legitimately started scouting the draft 3 to 4 drafts ago, depending on what you count as legitimate. And we don't have like the results are not final, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
I mean, you could just say like didn't develop the way you want to. Like it doesn't have to say like is a flop, but like it could just be like the development did not go the way that you like were projecting for the reasons you thought.
Totally. So then I think Okoro is a great answer here because I think for me what it was going to be was him utilizing touch indicators that we both kind of recognized and becoming like a solid enough catch and shoot guy and a solid enough volume guy to not be ignored is not the word I like to use in these situations, but to where the defense when he caught the ball with a ton of space, the defensive response was not to say like, what are you going to do about it? And so that's kind of been how it's been so far, and it's not like he's making them pay. And therefore, the developmental sort of change here that I would like to see is him, which he's already very good at, to his credit. But like adopting the Jayshawn Tate, like if you're gonna ask me what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna shove the basketball down your throat. Like Jayshawn Tate is the king of sprinting into the catch, and the guy who's defending him is like, oh, I'm guarding a non-shooter. I can sit at the free throw line. All of a sudden, it's like, oh shit! Like it's Jayshawn Tate coming at me full speed, and he gets to dictate where I'm moving now, and I'm kind of screwed.
So when did you get access to part 2 of this document? Because I may talk about that for an extended period of time.
Well, I was gonna actually, I thought you were gonna talk about it earlier too, with when I asked you the question early in the stream about designing or being an architect of gravity. I thought the answer was the other answer to the one you gave, and I thought this was going to be the leeway into us having this exact conversation. So that makes me excited that it's more happening in the second one.
Yeah, I wanted to just like, this one covered so much ground in terms of like having to do definitions that I was like, if I start throwing like fucking schematics on top of this, like I'm asking people for too much, and I'm basically trying to write an unreadable piece. I was like, this is a good break point. It also, that section is going to involve a lot of prospects, and there are rules and stuff that I agreed to when I contacted the booker, and paid your appearance fee or whatever, went through your management company, and your agent, the 30 people I had to go through to talk to you about basketball now. And yeah, this just seems like a natural point, but I think that so much of that is like, we don't think of that as gravity. It's like, oh, he's just attacking the rim. It's like, yeah, well, like, how is that fundamentally different? Like, somebody explain this to me. And that I think was something that the stream has done a really good job of. It's done a bad job of technical, competence, but it's done a good job of like explaining that like a lot of this stuff, if you center defense, a lot more of this falls into place, and there's actually less concepts to talk about. Because it's like, what are you trying to do? Manipulate rotations. Okay, there's a ton of ways to do that. Some of them involve being a good shooter. Some of them just being like a horse. Just like, yeah, I don't want to get hit by Jason Tate. That looks like it sucks. Let me get out of the way. And like, that's fundamentally the same concept as somebody going like, oh shit, I don't want that. It's like Steph Curry 3, Jason Tate running at you full speed. Like, there are so many ways to get that defense, like thinking, getting them reacting, which is, again, like, defenses are at their best when they're operating on chain and smoothly. If you can create a jagged defense that has to think and react, oh man, Jay Billis with hair, like, then you're in a good place. And for new viewers, this is the feed of the 2003 draft. Yeah, that is, like, to me, like, really, like, what talking with you is just like really made clear is that like so much of this is the same concept, and that we're not adding new stuff. We're actually kind of stripping away a lot of the extra. And that's definitely the ones I'm going to bring into part 2.
Oh, yeah.
Since nobody paid me $10,000, I guess we're not talking about draft prospects today. And we'll have to answer all of those questions next time. So yeah, Ward support any way you can. Listen to the pod. Take somebody else's phone, listen to the pod. Take somebody else's phone and subscribe. Do it with all your loved ones, like grandma's phone, whatever. Do what you got to do. Get those numbers up.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. If you can read the piece, I appreciate you. If you can, recommend this, if you can donate to the Patreon, and all that stuff is really appreciated. I have quite a bit of stuff coming out now, just because, I'm in a place where I feel like I can talk pretty authoritatively on things. For a long time, it's difficult to balance 3 levels. And I'm now getting to that point. But yeah, thank you everybody who stuck around. We got a lot more viewers than like I thought we would. Sorry for the delay. Had some updates and some weirdness happen on the computer side, but Let's Watch Film Heads been through those wars, and this sounds a lot better than that does. So nowhere good there. Thank you as always for joining me. I really appreciated it. And this will be up on YouTube for replays. I'll stitch all the like little jittery bits together, or do voiceover or whatever needs to happen. And throw that up on YouTube either tomorrow or the next day, depending on how long it takes to upload. Any final thoughts?
I think I've said all I need to say.
All right. Thank you again, and have a good night, everyone.